How will the 2024 presidential election unfold? I already regret making this video. Regardless of what I say in this one, I'm bound to cause some division. So, as a reminder, I'm a stickman and can't vote in US elections. Therefore, I will not be giving my opinions on these possible candidates, only a breakdown on how I see this election cycle potentially unraveling. Additionally, if I leave something out, it's not because I hate a candidate or want to see them suffer, it's just because I'm dumb and missed something in my research. If you feel like it's important enough to point it out in the comments, then feel free. Got it? Good. Now, if you thought the 2020 election cycle was wild, the US is in for a heck of a ride come 2024. As of recording this video, there are currently 15 presidential candidates in the running for 2024. We'll touch on most of them, those who are relevant enough to the conversation, in a bit. On the Democratic side, Joe Biden is the heavy favorite. The current president faces no real challengers at the moment, and no one really seems willing to throw their hat into the ring despite certain questions about his capacity to do the job. The Republican side, as you may have guessed, is far more complex, but one candidate still stands out as the heavy favorite, Donald Trump. He hasn't attended any of the Republican debates thus far, instead opting to attend his own events, and still has a hefty lead for the Republican candidacy in every poll. Before we get further into polling though, let's take a brief minute to meet all of those other candidates, at least the ones that actually matter. There are quite a few candidates I need to introduce here. For simplicity, let's work through each party, starting with the Democrats. Joe Biden is the current president of the United States, and barring any health setbacks before the election cycle fully gets going, it seems all but guaranteed that he will be the representative for the Democratic Party come 2024. In 2020, Biden ran on attempting to bridge much of the division in America. During his first 3 years, Biden and his campaign have focused on increasing jobs for the American people, fixing U.S. infrastructure, preventing economic collapse after the COVID pandemic, and much more. Again, don't get mad at me. I'm just the messenger. Despite what Biden has done, he's still struggling in the polls. According to Real Clear Politics polling averages, just 40% of the country approves of Biden's work so far. Perhaps more concerningly, nearly 75% of people think Joe Biden is too old for a second term as president, according to a recent poll conducted by AP Nork. Regardless of that, though, he faces little competition. The only other Democrats running are Marianne Williamson, who ran in 2020 and currently polls at 4% among Democrats, and Cenk Uygur, a progressive talk show host who literally announced his campaign a week ago. Okay, quick update as of recording this, Democratic Representative Dean Phillips of Minnesota has announced his campaign. If you're wondering who that is, I am too. However, he says he's doing it so someone is challenging Biden. Because he's so new and there aren't any polling numbers out there about him yet, this is probably the only time I'll mention him in this video. In all likelihood, he won't be too big of a threat. Basically what I'm saying is, barring some tragedy, Joe Biden will be the Democratic candidate for president in 2024. But what about outside of that party? Before getting into Republican candidates, let's take a look at some independents. Up first, we have Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the nephew of former President John F. Kennedy. RFK Jr. initially threw his hat into the ring for the Democratic candidacy, but backed out because of a variety of reasons, including his own hatred for those who currently run the party. Another prominent independent is Cornel West. West was initially mulling over running as the Green Party candidate, but chose to forego that to run as an independent instead. We'll talk more about RFK Jr. and West and how they may impact the general election in a bit, but for now let's keep talking about other candidates. As I've already said, the Republican Party is still dominated by former President Donald Trump, but that hasn't stopped several other candidates from announcing their campaigns. There are currently 9 Republican presidential candidates as of recording this video. However, only 6 of them are currently polling above 1% nationally. Because of this, I'll only be touching on these 6. Tim Scott is a senator from South Carolina. He's polling at just under 2%, the worst of the 6 names I listed. Fun fact, here's the ad you see when you go to his campaign website. Yeah, anyways. Chris Christie is up next. Out of all Republican candidates, Christie has been the least afraid to take shots at Donald Trump. He's basically running on the platform of saying that the Republican Party has been destroyed by Trump and he wants to make it what he used to be. He's taken quite a few shots at Trump during debates, some of which have been not so great.
And I want to look at that camera right now and tell you, Donald, I know you're watching. You can't help yourself. I know you're watching, okay? And you're not here tonight, not because of polls and not because of your indictments. You're not here tonight because you're afraid of being on the stage and defending your record. You're ducking these things. And let me tell you what's going to happen. You keep doing that, no one up here is going to call you Donald Trump anymore. We're going to call you Donald Duck.
Now we're getting into the more notable candidates, at least in terms of the polls. Stay with me here, we're almost done. Vivek Ramaswamy is a 38-year-old Silicon Valley entrepreneur. He's by far the youngest presidential candidate across all party lines and has received headlines in the past for promising to get rid of various federal agencies such as the FBI, CDC, and the IRS. He's an interesting guy, to say the least. Current polling averages have him at just over 5% nationally. We've now reached the top 3 Republican candidates. Nikki Haley is the former governor of South Carolina and a former U.S. ambassador ambassador to the United Nations, a position she held under the Trump administration. Haley has skyrocketed up the polls as of late, particularly due to impressive debate showings. In certain states, she's even challenging Trump, but we'll get to that more in a bit. Second in polling currently is Ron DeSantis, the current governor of Florida. DeSantis was initially viewed as a big threat to Trump when he first announced his presidency, but he's kind of fallen off a cliff in the polls recently. This was largely due to poor debate showings, an awkward demeanor, and a failure to go after Trump at the right times. He still polls in second place, but there's a very large gap between him and first. We've now reached the top of the Republican food chain where Donald Trump is still king. Despite extensive legal troubles, Trump still polls at just under 60% nationally amongst his party, which is just incredible stuff. He's ahead of DeSantis by about 46 points. With all of this in mind, the main question is now whether anyone can catch the Donald in the polls. To answer that, let's dive a bit more in depth into current polling and examine how the first few primaries may shake out. Now feels like a good time to mention that everything in this video should be taken with a grain of salt. We're still a year out from the election. Things could change a lot before then. You may be watching this a few months from now and be thinking, wow, this guy's an idiot. That's true, I am, but not because the info in this video was wrong. While the 2024 election cycle is well underway, the votes don't start officially being tallied until about 3 months from now when Iowa hosts its Republican caucus on January 15th, 2024. Iowa is a state that loves Trump. Shocker. He polls at just over 50% in the Hawkeye state, while DeSantis and Haley both sit at 16%. Basically what I'm saying is expect Trump to walk away with a victory here. He doesn't seem to be losing much support at all in Iowa, so we'll see if that changes over these next few months. Things do get kind of interesting in New Hampshire. The state's primary date is currently scheduled for sometime in January, and here Haley has been flying up the polls. She went from polling at just 3% in New Hampshire in late August to 19% in early October. She still trails Trump by about 30 percentage points, but has jumped DeSantis for second place. Keep an eye on what's going on in that tiny little state. In my personal opinion, I highly doubt Trump slips enough to even drop a single primary, given the grip he has on the Republican Party. However, with his myriad of legal troubles, who knows what could happen. In fact, let's take a quick detour to discuss those legal issues I've mentioned a few times. Donald Trump is facing charges in 4 separate criminal cases. In 3 of those 4 cases, a trial date for Trump has already been set. Basically, he could be in very real trouble. I'm not going to do a super deep dive into these charges because that's not what this video is about, but if you want to read more about them, I've linked a solid summary in the description below. Okay, back to the primaries. Initially, due to all of Trump's legal issues, there was a little speculation that he may not be able to get on the ballot in every state because of some questions surrounding the 14th Amendment. There's a short on my channel about this issue, but what's ended up happening is states have pushed back against removing him from ballots. What I'm trying to say is unless a court rules to remove him from a ballot, Trump isn't going anywhere. What's even crazier is how unwilling other Republicans are to oppose Trump. At the first Republican debate, candidates were asked whether they would support Trump for the presidency even if he was convicted. Check out their response.
If former President Trump is convicted in a court of law, would you still support him as your party's choice? Please raise your hand if you would.
Just listen to that roaring audience. Seriously though, this just demonstrates the firm grip Trump still has on the Republican Party despite his legal troubles. What I'm trying to say is, at this point in time, you should fully expect him to be the 2024 Republican nominee for president. In terms of the Democratic Party, Joe Biden should have smooth sailing throughout the Democratic primaries. The first Democratic primary will take place in New Hampshire, where, as of a late 2023 poll, Biden led Marianne Williamson by over 70 percentage points. Basically, Biden is also untouchable, especially since RFK Jr. has now declared that he's running as an independent. He won't get much heat, if any, in the primaries, and is pretty much guaranteed to be the Democratic nominee for president in 2024. So, in this scenario, we've now ended up back where we were in 2020, except with a few more interesting characters in the mix. With all of that in mind, it's now time to officially preview the 2024 election and break down just who might win this thing. Alright, we've made it. Fast forward to Election Day, November 4th, 2024. Who comes out on top will depend on a few things. First, what questions are being asked of Biden's health? Where does his approval rating sit a whole year from now? How does he specifically appeal to younger voters? I mention younger voters, specifically Gen Z, because they tend to vote less based on party and more so based on policy, which makes them more susceptible to voting for third-party candidates. I'm not going to argue whether it's a valid thing to do or not, I'm just stating the facts. Gen Z tends to vote more based on policy, and because of that, third-party candidates appeal to them more than than they appeal to other generations. Before getting into how these third-party candidates could impact the election though, let me first discuss why they even matter. In 2020, Biden won multiple swing states, that is, states that don't easily vote Democrat or Republican, by only a few thousand votes. In Georgia, the state where Trump is facing some serious legal troubles, Biden won by just over 12,000 votes. In Wisconsin, Biden walked away with it by just over 20,000 votes. In Arizona, Old Joe won there by about 11,000. The 2020 election didn't have as prominent of third-party candidates as 2024 will have. Therefore, if a few thousand voters in these key swing states decide to jump from Biden to a third-party candidate, the state could swing the other way entirely and give the electoral votes to Trump. To summarize, these third-party candidates objectively aren't really a threat to win states outright and take electoral votes. They more so just have the chance to play spoiler. Now let's discuss these third-party candidates. 2024 has two prominent names running as independents, both of whom I've already mentioned. Both Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and Cornel West could pull votes away from Biden because of certain platforms they're running on. First, I want to focus on RFK Jr. Before declaring his run as an independent, he was polling in double digits amongst Democratic voters, with one poll even seeing him garner 25% support to Biden's 57%. So there's obvious trouble for Biden here. Cornel West could also spoil Biden's re-election campaign, largely because of the progressive platform he's running on. Progressive policy largely appeals to, you guessed it, Gen Z. If these younger voters in swing states switch their vote to West instead of Biden, Sleepy Joe's got a real problem. Of course, these third-party candidates, specifically RFK Jr., could also spell trouble for Trump. RFK Jr. was initially going to run as a Democrat, but had quite a few viewpoints that may appeal to more far-right Republicans, such as high distrust in the federal government and a firm belief that vaccines cause autism. RFK Jr. has promoted several of these vaccine conspiracy theories, which has caught the attention of the far-right, many of whom love Trump. If those people see Trump as too big of a risk, I don't know how they would, but you never know, maybe their vote goes to RFK Jr. We also obviously need to ask the question of where Trump's legal troubles lie as we get closer to Election Day. It's almost impossible to see Trump winning the 2024 presidential election from a jail cell. For the purpose of this prediction though, we're going to assume that he dodges any criminal liability long enough to run a full campaign. Now we've arrived in November. Who wins each state? Let's bring up the map. Actually, before I do this, I just want to acknowledge how ridiculous it is for me to be trying to predict an election a full year away. This is all in good fun. Please keep that in mind. To begin, we'll give Biden every Democratic stronghold in the country, meaning he'll secure electoral votes from California, Illinois, New York, Washington, Oregon, and most of the Northeast. We'll also give him a few other states I can't be bothered to mention. Sorry if you live in one of those states, my bad, I don't mean to hurt your feelings. Anyways, giving Biden these states will place him at 210 electoral votes, a fair way off from the 270 he needs to win. Now let's assign every Republican stronghold to Trump. These include Texas, Florida, most of the Midwest, a decent chunk of the Rust Belt, most of the southern states, and a few states out west. We're also going to give him Virginia because that's just what current polling says. These states place Trump at 246 electoral votes. As we keep going, Biden takes all the electoral votes from Maine, and Trump takes the majority from Nebraska. As of this point, Trump currently leads Biden 247 to 214. It'll all come down to the swing states. Who gets them? This is where Biden gets into real trouble. A new New York Times poll suggests that Biden is trailing Trump in 5 key battleground states: Nevada, Georgia, Arizona, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. The only key battleground Biden currently leads in is Wisconsin, where he's up by about 2 percentage points. If Trump takes all 5 of these battleground states where he currently leads, he will win the 2024 election. In fact, in our scenario, he only needs 2 of Michigan, Georgia, and Pennsylvania to win. Any of the other states are just icing on the cake. Another kind of key thing to note, Biden's approval rating through his first 1,018 days is the lowest of every post-World War II president besides Jimmy Carter. That is really, really bad. And it's part of why, as of now, I really do think Donald Trump could win the 2024 election. Now, I know a lot could change in a year. We have no idea where things will be by then. Trump could be in prison, who knows? Biden could be totally unfit to run. This is an election unlike any other. We have 2 candidates who are basically destined to square off against each other again, and both of them have constant news swirling about why they aren't fit for the job. What a mess, right? I'd like to add that Biden obviously still has a shot. However, his polling numbers are extremely concerning, and his team should be very worried about all of that. I'm personally very curious to see where Dean Phillips' campaign will go, but I don't know if he has enough juice to pull off that big of an upset. Also, like I said before, I'm not endorsing any of these candidates, but as of this moment, I think Trump has a better shot at winning the 2024 election than Biden, purely based on polling and political commentary. Remember, he only needs a few of those swing states where he's currently leading to get to 270. Those are pretty good odds. You may not think that's a very well-informed opinion, and if you don't, that's okay, but I encourage you to check out my sources in the description so that you can see that I actually did do some research. Please stick around for this final part. Let's debrief real quick. Like I said at the beginning of this video, this was bound to cause some division. If you think I made some huge mistake or I'm just a dumb, stupid idiot, feel free to let me hear it in the comments below. I know polls aren't everything, but since we're still a year out from this next election, it's the best tool I've got to base my predictions on right now. There are also still a million different paths this election cycle could go in. I'm reading right now that Iowa's governor just endorsed Ron DeSantis. That's a crazy twist. Remember that this was all in good fun. Also, one more time, take all of this with a grain of salt. Everything could have changed by the time you're watching this. And once again, nothing I said in this video is an endorsement of any candidate. As I mentioned at the beginning, I cannot vote in US elections. I am a stickman. I am not eligible to vote. If you've made it this far, I really appreciate you watching. Feel free to stick around for the next video I've got coming. It won't be current events based, that's for sure. I feel like I need to go bleach my eyeballs after looking at all this polling data. If you're interested in learning more, all of my research links are in the description. If shorter content is your thing, feel free to check me out on Instagram, TikTok, or YouTube Shorts. I do some fun videos on there every now and then that you might enjoy. Okay, that's all I've got for now. Thank you so much for watching. I hope I see you next time.